In topics 4 and 5, the Americas and Africa, we're going to continue our look at how to build and maintain a state. You'll remember that states are politically organized territories. We'll start in the Americas. In the Americas, we're going to look at two prime examples of how to build and maintain your state. First, let's start with the northernmost of the two, the Mexica, or as you probably know them, the Aztec. So Mexica is a name of the group of people who moved into the Central Valley of Mexico around the 1300s from somewhere north of that. It's not really clear where they came from, but we do know it's north of central Mexico. They were a generally nomadic group who were traveling in search of a place to settle. There had probably been some squabbles in that northern region where they were coming from that forced them south. Legend had it that they would settle where an eagle was perched on top of a cactus with a snake in its beak. This would be recognized as a sign from their primary god, Huitzilopochtli. Lo and behold, that happened to be in the Valley of Mexico near Lake Texcoco. This was a pretty great area. In fact, it was so great that there were several other groups living nearby, and the ruins of two ancient civilizations, one known as the Toltecs and the other now just known as Teotihuacan, just a few miles off. As the Mexica settled on the southern coast of Lake Texcoco, naming their city Tenochtitlan, they came into contact with these other groups and developed some rivalries with other city-states in the area, two of them named Texcoco and Tlacopan. Eventually, through marriage, the three major city-states were united in an alliance called the Aztec Triple Alliance in order to take on another rival city-state in war. While the trio was victorious, the Mexica used the victory to catapult themselves to the top of that alliance and become the dominant force in what became the Aztec Empire. This is kind of shaky ground to start an empire on. Not everybody's on board, and you kind of have to convince them to be a part of your empire as you go. So how do you keep them, and how do you control them when they're used to being their own independent city-states? Well, you use a combination of religion and taxes. The religion of the Mexica was polytheistic, so there were many gods. And it's difficult for us as modern humans to wrap our heads around, not just because it's polytheistic, but because of some other things. Their primary gods were the god of rain and agriculture, Tlaloc, and the god of fire, war, and the sun, Huitzilopochtli. You can kind of see how those two fit together. And if you can't, here's a breakdown. So agriculture needs rain and the sun. When we grow food from the earth, we are taking from it. Very sad. We carve into it and force it to give us life. We don't really ever give anything back. Well, war is how we give back. How? Well, war feeds the earth through our lives, our blood. Enter human sacrifice. What better gift can we give the earth than our lives? It sustains us through its life force and needs ours in order to keep things going. Without the sacrifice of our lives, the sun won't rise, the crops won't grow, and life as we know it ends. So how do we get these lives? I said war, right? Okay, so the Aztec Empire collected tribute from these other city-states that they forced into submission through conquest and or negotiation. Much of the tribute was goods, textiles, precious metals, crops, and so on. A good chunk of the tribute was also people. These people would become the honorary sacrifices who were blessed enough to keep the sun rising and keep the darkness at bay for a little while longer. These displays of power, religious meaning, and prestige, look at that temple, impress their enemies, their allies, and their subjects all at the same time. So if you were in Mesoamerica, that's how you worked to hold together your empire. If you're in South America, you go about things a little differently. We're going to zoom down to the Andes, where life is very different from Mesoamerica and very different on one side of the mountains compared to the other. As the Inca civilization emerged, they grew to unite very different geographical situations: the jungles of lowland Bolivia, the highlands of the Andes, and the deserts of the coasts. Like the Mexica, the Inca also began with their own small city-state named Cusco, and then grow it through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and conquest to be the huge 2,400-mile-long empire in this map. Also like the Mexica, who tried to mimic the ancient city of Teotihuacan in their architecture and in some aspects of their religion, the Inca will also continue traditions from previous empires like the Wari and the Tiwanaku. This is an interesting phenomenon. Many states will do this to justify their power and authority. I mean, you're basically saying, well, see, nothing has changed here. It's all the same as it was before. No need to revolt at all. They particularly drew on what we might recognize as almost a form of feudalism. Those higher up the social structure provide military protection, hospitality to those below, and in return, labor and allegiance are provided to those above. The labor that was required of those incorporated into the Inca Empire was a rotational labor system known as the mita. Basically, each village provided a certain number of men to work on state infrastructure projects every few months. These projects would include irrigation, roads, or other construction work that helped to tie the empire together. So while the Aztec relied on a tribute system for their empire to demonstrate its allegiance, the Inca used this labor system to literally knit the empire together. Like the Mexica, however, the Inca also used religion to justify their rule, tying the royal family to the sun god Inti and employing a kind of divine kingship model. We're going to switch gears and jump across the Atlantic for a little while. Prior to our time period, both the northern coast of Africa along the Mediterranean and the eastern coast of Africa along the Indian Ocean had been deeply ingrained in world trade systems for quite some time. However, the Sahara had proven to be quite the obstacle to incorporating sub-Saharan Africa into that same trade network. Enter Islamic merchants from northern Africa. As part of trade caravans, Muslim merchants worked their way down the Nile and across the continent and into West Africa, where they encountered complex civilizations that had been involved in some limited trade across the Sahara already to the civilization of the Mediterranean. West Africa, it turns out, has a lot of gold, and these civilizations were definitely making use of it. Kingdoms like the Hausa kingdoms, Ghana, and Mali, which was founded in 1240 by a man named Sundiata, existed. Mali, like Ghana, was primarily dominated by Islam, which arrived with the traders and their camels from Arabia. These camels became a huge advantage to African merchants, who were able to trade much more easily across the Sahara, leading to the creation of cities like Timbuktu, one of the greatest centers of learning on the planet, and men like Mansa Musa, king of Mali, and largely considered to be the richest man ever. So these empires in West Africa were mostly run through, you guessed it, a combination of religion and trade. Islam and gold being the most important in the toolbox. In Eastern Africa, religion and trade will continue to be important. We'll start with Ethiopia because it's kind of the outlier. The Kingdom of Ethiopia was in existence in ancient times and was deeply impacted by the spread of Christianity along the Mediterranean. The kings of Ethiopia converted to Christianity, and Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity is its primary religion still. This gave Ethiopians an advantage when trading with Christian merchants, but there weren't many of them going around during this heyday. Many of the kings of Ethiopia were crowned in the city of Axum because legend had it that the Ark of the Covenant was there and the Queen of Sheba had brought it back after her visit with King Solomon in Jerusalem. Talk about religion and trade. Farther to the south, a state known as Great Zimbabwe emerged, leaving spectacular ruins that until only recently, white European historians claimed were made by escaped Europeans or Arabs instead of sub-Saharan Africans. Great Zimbabwe was located on major trade routes from the interior of Eastern Africa, great agricultural land, to the East Coast, known for its prime trade routes along the Indian Ocean. So state building is a tricky thing. Conquering the territory is a great first step. But how do you keep it all together? It really depends on who you are and where you are. What tools can you pull from your toolbox in order to maintain the peace? Warfare, diplomacy, religion, roads. There are many ways to keep control.